Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Dave, take down the video resume shortly and make it once. Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
outstanding. This is one of the reasons why we have to do this, because in the future of Team Earth, if we're not communicating, we're not working together. So, uh, space technology is going to help improve this particular issue as well. But we got a lot of things to talk about. My name's Carlton Johnson. Uh, I'm multi-hatted. I am professionally the CEO of Delayed Strategy Group. It's a advisory that does C-suite advisory, space development, and cyber risk with Fortune 500 companies. And I also sit on a number of boards, one of which is the National Space Society, and I'm the chairman of the National Space Society Board of Governors. Uh, in the capacity that I have worked with and in space over the last 35 years, served in the United States Air Force, doing all things type of space related and cyber, and have moved out from retirement but not expired into the private sector. And when we come to this whole subject of looking at the African continent and space, a lot of times as I talk to people, people will say, I don't really have my country, my area doesn't have a place in space. There's nothing we do. And I would tell you that uh, that would be a short-sighted perspective because when you look at what I call spacefaring nations, spacefaring nations are going to continue to develop and create capabilities and utilize the vast resources of space as we move out from going Earth independent to Earth, from Earth dependent to Earth independent. When that happens, and you're looking at those nations going forth and utilizing those resources, if the meek truly inherit Earth, and if you look at the history of humankind, uh, we don't want to leave a wasteland behind because those who stay behind on planet Earth will inherit that. Rather, we need to have a team effort that leverages the best skills of all the various nations working together. And as you go into space, each one has a contributing effect in that effort. And the African nations can be and should be a part of that. And so, one of the things that I talk about with many people across this spectrum is what is the value proposition that a nation has when it comes to their economic development? And then, how does that value proposition work within the context of supporting space operations, space development, space exploration? So, case in point, if you have a nation and they're primarily an agricultural nation, sometimes people would say, yeah, I don't have anything that I do in space. Well, that's not true. Every single day, we're utilizing space related technologies, even in the agricultural sector. We're using satellite technology, we're using GPS, we're using uh, Earth look down, understand capabilities to help us understand weather patterns and so forth. So in that case, we are actually doing a lot in space in the agricultural area. So if we say that that's true, then that nation that has a footprint on the agricultural side can say, when we go from Earth dependent to Earth independent, maybe there's an area where I can use the agricultural skills that we have, the intellectual capital from my workforce or the technological capabilities to help do that same type of work beyond Earth's atmosphere. Or better yet, maybe my nation can be a nation that's a test bed for new capabilities that are agricultural related. So there is a value proposition that any country who wants to participate in this multi-trillion dollar space economy that's coming, uh, any nation can participate. But it starts with asking and answering the question, do we want to be a spacefaring nation? If the answer is yes, then the second question is, what is the value proposition that we offer? And how do we now communicate that and translate that into a return on investment with other nations that are participating in this ecosystem? And then third, once you answer that, what are the actions that you need to take, uh, broad spectrum across your nation, to be able to jump into that market and contribute to the greater picture? And so one of the things when I talk about space development that I'm doing and working with many people, and you'll hear from Rose in a few minutes. She, by the way, uh, this particular forum, Rose and I had met months ago talking about this similar issue. And so it was just happenstance that we joined the same session. But you're going to find that success leaves clues. And she's worked on some footprints to understand this better as well. So looking forward to hearing her comments. But for each of you in the room, here's my challenge. You got to ask and answer the question, do you want to be part of this economy? And if you don't get into the game, you can't play. Once you get into the game, do you want to be a JV player, a junior varsity player, and sit on the bench, or do you want to actually get out there, run the ball, make something happen? And if you want to do that, then the last thing I would challenge you to ask yourself is, do you want to be a general player or an Olympic contender? And if you want to be an Olympic contender in the space economy, now's the time to join. And the African nations do have a place in this sector. And there are people like me and others out there willing to help to make that happen. So those are my overall comments. I'd rather hear your questions and we can go from there. But I really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion with you, and look forward to seeing you on the high frontier. And I don't know if you guys can still hear me. Okay, I'm not hearing anything, but I'm standing by. Okay, I can see in our chat that we have some communication between me and the team backstage, but for the team that's in the room, I can't hear you, but I am looking forward to any of the questions that you have, and I will just be on standby. I need you to check first.
That you and Rose will be flooded with questions after we. All right, great.
All right.
So at this
You
point,
guys,
we're going to be Rose. I don't want to spoil our last name. What's your name? What? Crozier or Crozier?
It's Crozier, but there's no way you would guess correctly. It's originally a French name that then was kind of mauled by the US over a couple hundred years. So it's pronounced Crozier here, but for my Francophone friends, it'd be Crozier, right? So. So I don't hear anything, so I'm not sure if I should get started. Should I?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Charmin, get started, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm introduction earlier. I'm so delighted to be here, and I've really enjoyed the conversation and the previous briefings by Aisha and the introduction, just completed by Carlton. So to continue the thread, my objective here is to talk about building a space ecosystem, and then particularly thinking about the skills and the contributions sort of across the range of society that can be a part of that ecosystem. I think sometimes it gets to be a little too focused on, I mean, STEM is incredibly important, but we really need, all walks to be a part of this to fully unlock the capabilities that are found using space. So my first image on here is really just comparing and contrasting the organic development of any kind of system versus a more deliberate effort. So you can see in organic, it's just, there's activity, there's things happening, there's some connections, but it's very slow. If you have a kind of a center point, not that it's supposed to be, directive in all things, but it can accelerate those connections. It can recognize gaps in the ecosystem and direct resources and manpower and thought in that direction. So I kind of symbolize that with the blue lines, about how you can move things forward. It's still going to be messy. Some sectors are going to be larger than others and more robust than others, and that's completely normal. But if you have some deliberate planning in the mix, it can really help kind of move things forward more quickly. So that's kind of my main point in general. And that also includes kind of developing your workforce, right? Let me take a step back and again, thank you so much for bringing, ferrying copies of the Handbook for Space Capability Development. I worked on this for about 1.5 years at the Center for Global Development, and it was, I learned certainly along the way, and I learned through doing many interviews to include with representatives from Kenya and other countries in Africa, to include South America as well, and Europe and the United States. So it's come from like voices from many sides. But I think through that period, what kind of distilled for me, if you're thinking about what is that responsibility of that sort of driving force in the center to help move forward the development of the ecosystem, I would lay the responsibility, the core responsibility with the government, to say you're interested in developing a spacefaring capability. What does that mean? What kind of activities should be included if you have, be it a space advisor or an office or a full agency? These are sort of core capabilities, and you don't need to have NASA to do that. You can do this with a much more sort of modest, right-sized group of people that have a plan. And so some of those roles include consultation and localization, meaning evaluating different space capabilities and sort of advising on what might work versus other existing technology. Although we all agree space is wonderful, it's not necessarily exactly the right solution for every problem, or maybe it's done in concert with other technology. And then, kind of the main star of our conversation today is that coordination piece. Like, how do you kind of reach out to civil society and academia and government and private sector, just orchestrate kind of more deliberate growth to sort of accelerate your ecosystem's maturity? And I'd say that really comes through with management. So having a space program does give you an anchor to do deliberate planning that is looking near, mid, long term, developing specific objectives. Of course, the African Union space policy and strategy is an absolute marvel, a fantastic achievement that provides a framework for any country in Africa moving forward. And then there's many programs that have made incredible national strides, especially Kenya. And then the last part I think is very important, recognizing kind of being proactively part of the global space community through representation and regulation at different forums like the United Nations or the National Telecommunications Union. These are forums where we're kind of crafting how we operate as a global ecosystem, and it's important that all countries have a voice there as well. So I go much more into detail on this in the handbook, but I think that gives us a good baseline for this conversation. More on the ecosystem. So you have my messy dots on your right side. That's what the ecosystem might actually look like. But say how do you stage, how do you stagger what you're working on? And the main point of this is showing is ideally you can create positive feedback. So not every action is a direct action by that space office. It is setting up the circumstances, creating a good environment for your space ecosystem so that one thing sort of leads to another in a positive pattern. And that may start with a government program that's directing funding to specific activities, be it sponsoring a program, maybe an action like this conference right now, to bring the right people together, kind of focus on objectives, bringing together resources. And then, this can lead to minimally growth of end users with more awareness, more a demand signal for these activities, which can in turn spur further activity via civil society, via the private sector. Maybe, as Carlton was mentioning earlier, maybe there's a good business case to be made for employing remote sensing data against a new localized problem, and there's a profit there. There's a growth there that's possible, and of course, continued work through academia. All of this additional activity can bring resources back to the government, which in turn can help spur further activities. But this is a way to make the machine turn forward. And then, because we're talking about different skills, I just wanted to take a moment and kind of think about when it comes to geospatial data, to position, navigation, and timing activity. What kind of skills are we even talking about? And I'd say on the far left are the more technical skills where you might need, an advanced degree or years of study to fully leverage, and then, the most accessible, where people are not even aware that maybe space is involved. So an example of that may be, as mentioned earlier, weather reports. I mean, weather data, picked up by remote sensing, gets fused with a lot of other information, and may just be a radio broadcast. There's still space involved, but you don't have to put a label on it to be using it. So contrast that with the most technical side, where maybe you have, a scientist who's looking at leveraging spectrum in a new way to identify maybe a type of soil that, to say whether or not it's, moist or not, or is appropriate for a particular kind of vegetation in a very specific area. This requires advanced skills, but it's incredibly important that we have this whole range, because a scientist sitting in France or in the United States or China may not be necessarily looking at the unique set of vegetation that is appropriate for Kenya or for Ghana or for Senegal. So that core research is incredibly important. And then you pull that through development of actually its use and developing platforms. This requires cultural sensitivity. It requires understanding, what does the information landscape look like? How do people receive information? Languages. I mean, all of this are important inputs. It's not strictly STEM. It requires kind of these sort of combined skill sets. And if you do the same but look at communications, again, there's a similar progression from highly technical, to very accessible. And I say this because I think people often bend themselves or imagine that they can't be a part of the space community because they aren't necessarily on the far technical side. There's room, there's need for people along each step. These graphics are both in the Handbook for Space Capability Development as well. So I know we're constrained by time, so I'm happy to talk about it with anyone at any point. This is just a quick look at the space value chain. So moving from idea creation to literally raw materials through equipment that is put into space or supports activities in space, to operations happening when an object is in orbit in some capacity, to the services they provide. So, GPS, remote sensing data, communications. Because really a satellite is just, a hard piece of software, a hard piece of material that is moving information from point A to point B, or is pulling in new information and relaying it down. So it's not so special in some ways from many other types of sensors or communication capabilities. It just happens to be in orbit, so it requires a little more. It has certain advantages, right? So it requires a little bit more specialization, but I think we could be more inclusive in what we consider space relevant. And then the value added services really is another way of saying, those localized capabilities where people combine maybe communications and GPS and remote sensing in new ways that are unique to a particular community. And it's an unending, incredibly rich area that could be, more fully leveraged by any nation. And what they can do is kind of like build infrastructure to support those kind of value-added activities. So not to overwhelm everyone, but this is just a quick snapshot of the global space ecosystem. My point here is saying it is massive and varied, and there's many on-ramps and interests, which is why it's so important for a country to determine, what is their priority to help focus this massive activity into those things that are of most interest to a particular community. And to make that a little more real, this is kind of a list of different, types of offices, kind of focused on government here in particular, but doesn't have to be government. And what kind of things would they necessarily be interested in? So with maritime security, for example, under law or justice, or even like security, an interest in finding illegal, maritime activity, using space applications can really accelerate that. So it's a particular use that can be drilled into, that a space office can help coordinate this, help educate, what is in the realm of the possible, and help accelerate the nuts and bolts of actually making it happen. Like, how do you get a contract how do you put together a contract to acquire remote sensing data? What are the entities within the telecommunications union that touch space capabilities, and how do you accelerate that particular capability, maybe for particularly remote areas? All I'm saying is, there needs to be a real campaign to educate and engage people that are not necessarily traditionally seen as part of the space community. So, in the handbook, I talk about, why, what, and how, but I did want to, kind of mention the space is just a system of systems, and you can use this approach for developing space capability like you would for developing telecommunications infrastructure or roads or schools. It's the same foundational kind of structure, and it works. But the main point is that it's deliberate, it's iterative, meaning that it's not necessarily perfect the first time out of the box. You have to keep working on it and keep evolving it, and no start is too small. And also just some expectation management. I was a program manager for 10 years, and I worked on a lot of programs. And this is just a simple illustration of kind of what's normal. So you have a desired level, desired capability that you want to get to, and using projects as a fulcrum to kind of build, concentrate resources, bring the correct, the right people in, determine, your methods and how you're going to do it. It just takes time, and you're going to find that your capability kind of increases and decreases through a rhythm over time as you get more and more sort of complex or more multiple projects under that umbrella. And this is totally normal. And if you look at that, that sort of organism that are put on the first slide with all these dots and lines, well, each one of those points have their own particular possibility to do this kind of pattern to develop their internal capability. So this can be a big picture, and it can also be kind of more narrow. So with that, I just want to conclude that my main point in the handbook is talking about the importance of having a space program to have sort of an anchor and a directive force, and that you need to move from organic effort to a more deliberate effort to accelerate the development of the space program. And then with foundational space capabilities, just really the criticality of coordinating and managing and connecting the community at every step of the way can really help accelerate the evolution of a space ecosystem. Okay, so that's it for me. I look forward to our conversation here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So before you ask questions, let me remind you, you heard from Carlton, you heard from Rose, talking about foundational capacity. Now remember, we're here to talk about building an analog space research station. Where does that fit into foundational capacity? Now, how many engineers and scientists and physicists are in the room? All right, so mostly everybody. So not many lawyers. Lawyers, business, policy people. A couple, all right. Now on the legal side, one would say, what you would do if you're actually testing out a law before it's a law. You might do like a moot court, mock trials, those things. So we've simulated what you're trying to get to. Because you're talking about trying to research something that's going to be real, you want to practice. So our research stations in life in space, a problem, could be a human factors problem, it could be an engineering problem such as something to do with water systems, energy systems, or whatever. Or in the case of this project, which will have both space for the SDGs or space for Earth and space for space, we're looking at actually two different things. Because for too long, from my perspective, engineering schools, whether they be in Kenya or Jamaica, teach at a very abstract level. There's not a lot of practical, intentional design. And your first slide's talking about being deliberate, whether you want to have an iterative design. That from these people, lessons you might learn for moving forward.
All right, thanks, Dr. Nelson. So she has wants to jump out with their first question within this context. Yes, thank you.
Can you guys hear us? We're not hearing anything, and I don't know if there was a question on the table or not. Hey, this is Carlton Johnson. I think we're still on the show, but
My apologies, I was muted. I was just explaining that I think we have to reset the feed coming in from the room, right? So give us a moment.
okay. If there's a question, by the way, and we're not hearing it, can you just let us know what the question was?
The problem is based upon where I am, I can't do that. Let me see if I can. Hold a second.
Hey, Rose, do you have check the chat?
What's that? I'm sorry. Oh, yes.
Which looks at government, it looks at private sector, it looks at some other players and the end users. And she had some arrows pointing and so on. Is your understanding the same as Toby's question, where he said, rather than go learn new skills in order to play in this space ecosystem, can we leverage the current skills and capabilities we have to be able to find a role in it?
Was that a question for us?
Understanding?
Yeah.
Huh? That was my understanding too. Are you hearing?
Hey, this is
Are
Carlton.
you hearing now, Carlton and Rose?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hello?
Really just now. So I'm sorry. Could you restate the question, because we missed the majority of that, I think.
Current skills. You can hear now?
Go ahead.
Can you hear now?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
They can? All right. So
Yes.
Rose, the question that was raised is, there was a model that you had, which looked at academia, private sector, civil society, and the various participation and skills that were required. And Toby was asking, can we leverage our current skills and competencies and capabilities to play in this system, or do we have to go acquire new skills to play in the ecosystem?
It's going to be a combination.
Did you get the question?
Yes, can you hear me okay? I hope you can hear me. What I was saying is it will be a combination. You know, you already, I'm sure, have many people that are able to participate in the space economy and the space ecosystem today. You know, you also will need to, and this is why I think it's important for there to be a kind of a central coordinating entity that strives to understand, well, you know, what do we have in hand? And it's important to focus that to a particular objective. So say, you know, a priority issue is flooding, then naturally you maybe look at, well, what are the space applications relevant to understanding the flooding problem and supporting work to mitigate that, to lessen the risk of flooding. And through that lens, you can identify the specifics, like, okay, if I am trying to create a product that shows the low-lying areas at risk over the next 10 years due to climate change, that'll focus your combination of, you know, scientists and researchers and programmers and, you know, people, you know, who understand geospatial information systems enough to have that team of maybe 5 to 10 people. It doesn't take 1,000 to achieve that particular project, you know, and then through that you can make it more, move it on that scale from the very technical side to the more accessible side, to the point where maybe it's a dashboard that, you know, your local community can access to understand, you know, well, where are they in elevation? Are they in a risk zone for flooding? And then you can connect that to, you know, government services or private sector businesses or something to start going after some of those problems. You know, so that's how you can take this, like, thing, you know, we have to be able to do everything and make it much more local and doable. And you just do that, you know, project by project, priority by priority, and before you know it, you have, you know, 5 or 6 things going on, you know, and then 10 years later, you have 1,000 things going on that are, you know, increasingly connected. So you pull a thread with what matters most to that local community.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question quickly? Anybody has a question for Carlton? Carlton was speaking directly to you on what it is that you need to do. Who's that? Who has that question? Yes. Can somebody give him the microphone, please? It's all right. Question for you, Carlton.
It's for Rose.
It's for Rose, sorry.
Yes. Can you provide examples of real-world applications where satellite data has significantly improved capacity building for analog space systems?
Did you hear the question, Rose?
I did, but I would actually point to my dear colleague Claire, Dr. Nelson, to really about to analog systems. I mean, I think what's critical with analog systems is you're going through the mechanics of like, well, what would this actually feel and look like? So you move it out of purely theoretical and you start testing it against a real world scenario, even scaled, you know, and that can help what actually needed or what real world skills are really needed. So you're concentrating your resources more deliberately. Again, I'm talking about deliberate action, you know, so I think it's incredibly important. And I think this project is what will reveal what applications are most applicable. I mean, I could riff on the combination of remote sensing and communications and GPS, you know, but it's going to be those three things in sort of different proportions, right?
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, quickly, please. Yes, Mark?
Thank you. My question goes to Carlton. When it comes to, I see in your talk, you talked about us not being in the sidelines and having a more deliberate effort towards being a player in the space. Now, when it comes to analog stations, it is mostly, unless we leverage on the, what do you call it, just simply the landscape, because we have a huge desert area towards the northern country. So other than leveraging on just the physical elements for us to invest in this, what kind of capacity in terms of personnel or training do we need to start investing in so that we can be some sort of hub for analog stations, or to have a deeper stake in terms of doing experiments here on the ground that can be utilized in Mars and other celestial bodies?
Here's Isaac. Get ready for your question.
Who's that question for?
You, Carlton.
Okay, could you, ma'am, could you paraphrase the question?
And summarize it, make it short.
Okay, other than having the physical characteristics such as a harsh climate, desert-like area that is akin to what is on celestial bodies, what do we need to train our students for, or what kind of staff do we need to be able to utilize this, or to be a hub for analog stations and the like?
Yeah, got it. So there's a couple of things, and as Rose talked about, when you look at the ecosystem, it depends on where you're talking about within the ecosystem. From my perspective, this starts with an economic analysis at the governmental level that says this is what we do very well for the various things that produce gross national product in our nation. And then based off of these things, this is the economic value that we have from those capabilities. And then that translates into how do you now take that and communicate that in terms of space-related technologies, capabilities, requirements. Once you have that, then that trickles down, I believe, into the education side that says, if our economic value analysis says that we are good at these three things, and these three things have the best insertion into the space economy, then what we want our students to start doing is to learn these types of skills. We want to translate that into what we see others doing. Maybe there's partnership opportunities we can do with other nations or companies. And then that's what we focus on at the educational level. So in my opinion, you have to look at this first at the national level and then bring it down into, based off of those things, what do you now start training the students on? And to put it in a shorter term, just in terms of what I understand going on in the various African nations, everybody focuses on, as Rose mentioned, STEM and so forth. So the engineering skills and all those are very important. What I think is missing are the non-engineering related skills we're going to need for space. For example, space health is going to change significantly. How you are a space, as you're a doctor on planet Earth, you're not going to be the same type of doctor in space. So there are different things you should be training on. So I would offer that the schools have got to start asking the question, how does our curriculum need to change also to adapt to this new evolving thing called space? And that's where the partnership comes in between the government and the educational side.
If I may comment as well.
So let me give for example on a comment. So let's think about Kenya 2030, right? I'm not sure how active that is, but at least you have a dashboard, you have all kind of concepts established. So if you were to take a dashboard around, let's say, tourism sector, which is a huge driver right? And the whole issue of climate change and the animals. Biodiversity is also an SDG, so it has to address two values. So the value of nature, the nature ecosystem to Kenya is huge. You have to have people who are understanding the data set, how to do it both from the technical side, as in the actual sensors that are being used, and the whole ecosystem of the tourism sector use of sensors to do.
If I may add a moment, thinking in a university setting, an incredible project could be doing a sort of cross-pollination where you would use your more humanities focused students to maybe articulate a challenge. Say, okay, we can look at this economic analysis that was done. Here are the constraints that were identified, and then walk over and sit with engineering or thinking about aerospace, or have a better understanding of geospatial information systems or even communications, and really do a SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, relevant to space, to that particular problem in a localized way, and then work together to develop a plan. What would be the combination of space applications that are applicable to this, and work together to identify, what could we do with this, and that's exactly the kind of thing that spurs new companies. Graduates move on, like, oh, this is an opportunity. I've defined a business plan in this safe environment where I had this, access to all these different minds and backgrounds. And then they can that's exactly something that would spin off ideally, where you've got someone who's going after that particular problem. There are many places to find well documented challenges, and then you can use this sort of bank of space understanding to try to go after that. I think that's a university is an ideal environment to do that kind of work.
Thank you. And we like your model on the academia, the private sector, and others, because that shows the whole big picture and how each group can find their space in that. Where's Isaac? He disappeared? He didn't want to ask a question. Yes, Mishak?
Oh, I was just showing you Isaac, but I can...
Give him the microphone.
Okay. Well, I can ask this question to both Rose and Carlton. So, Meshach here. So I really needed to emphasize on one thing that we face as a challenge on the continent is having bankable projects on space. We've been emphasizing a lot on the value of the economy of space, but in order for us to be able to communicate also to the decision makers, do you think our study of how much we can lose if we miss in the next step of space would also communicate to the decision makers?
Yes.
And I'm asking the question to the two because I understand that Rose and African Union are actually working on a possibility of having a side event during the IAC to convene the African stakeholders and the US stakeholders as well.
So communicate both the risks and the opportunities.
Exactly, because we find it difficult to, the value is estimated on the economy, but then on the other side, you can show them, okay, how much you're going to lose if you miss in the next step.
Yes.
Carlton mentioned that if you don't get into the game, you start to lose a lot, but we haven't quantified that.
So Carlton, you want to take that first and then Rose?
Yeah. So, and that's really kind of the challenge, and one of the things that I see both in the U.S. but also globally is when you talk about space at the policy level, at the strategic level, a lot of times, let me make this simple. If you're in the United States and you're talking to somebody who's a senior leader, congressional or senatorial leader, you have to talk not in terms of space is cool and it's going to do all these things. It really comes down to, is this going to create jobs in my sector? is this going to help me get promoted? And is it something that I really should push in terms of my platform of all the other things I should discuss? And so what I think you need to do is align space-related things to solve problems that people find interesting. Case in point, I think somebody mentioned water resources, or at least I remember talking about that recently. If you look at the technologies today that are focusing on climate change, well, those technologies are space-related technologies. So if you can link space education, space development, whatever the sector you're talking about for space, into something that falls into the rack and stack of what a politician thinks is interesting, then you start to get the conversation where you get your foot in the door and can talk about it. The other way to do it is to highlight the problem in a way where the politicians, the senior leaders, have no choice but to address the problem. And this comes into getting out and communicating it in a way where the voters, at least in the United States, the voters say, I want you to focus on this, and I don't want you just to talk about it. I want to see a plan. So there's different ways you can do it, but it starts with understanding what they find interesting, what the constituents find interesting, and then marrying space-related issue, technology capability to that type of problem. I deal with this all the time, and I've been in several meetings where I've seen other people go, you should look at this because space is cool. And I could just see the glazed look on the eyes of the senior leader. They're like, thank you very much. But when the other person comes in and says, if you don't do this, you're not going to get reelected. If you don't do this, your constituents will lose jobs. Or if you do this, it'll create jobs and opportunities. Then they listen. So that's just one thought. Rose, you got some ideas?
I absolutely think you're clearly on the right track, Carlton. Some other specifics, thinking about risks and opportunities. So Australia recently established their space program, and I was curious why they did it. Like, what was the tipping point for them to do it? And what they had done is they had reached out to their community, civil society, academia, business sector, everybody. Like, okay, what is your experience? What are your thoughts on this? And one of the quotes that was fascinating was a farmer, said like, hey, other countries know how much wheat I'm producing before I know it, because they're using satellite imagery to track the health and development of my wheat, and it's affecting the market price before I even harvest it. So why are we the last ones to know what we're capable of doing and prepare for that market? It's passing us by because we don't have this data at least on par with everyone else. And so that seemed to bring it into focus for policymakers, that amongst other comments. So if you're ever interested, you should go. I have to like dig up this document, but it was full of great quotes like this. Like where was the aha moments along the way due to kind of polling the community. And also in the realm of opportunity, there was a study done a few years ago that looked at what would it cost to do traditional connectivity for telecommunications infrastructure so that every person on the continent of Africa had a baseline level of access to the internet and could participate in the digital economy in some way. And it's an astronomical figure, like 7 billion or something. It was really, really huge. And there's all sorts of problems with it, because even if you laid fiber optic cable, and just invested and drilled into the most remote villages to make sure people had access, because it doesn't have a good business plan, like local telecommunications companies aren't getting return on that investment. There's no incentive to keep those the infrastructure functional. So it's a losing long-term solution, Whereas space is an example that offers an alternative. Okay, so as space-based telecommunication expands and is able to take a greater burden of traffic, and it becomes easier and easier. You don't have to have a massive satellite dish anymore. You could have something the size of a pizza box on the ground to receive a decent signal. Although it's still expensive for the vast majority of people, it's on the right path of getting to be within range. And I could see the day where it's less than $30 a month or less than $10 a month to be able to access data no matter where you are. And now it's a doable business proposition. You have somebody who's got, you know, an interest in maintaining that infrastructure and developing the policy behind it, because you're achieving things without a constant influx of development money to force it to exist. You know, so that is an opportunity that is emerging that I think is of real interest across, you know, society, from government for very strategic reasons, all the way to, you know, that person who is just interested in making sure that they get the best market price for their goods from their remote village, right?
Hey, there's one additional thing I want to add to that, and this kind of gets back to Doctor. I think you attended one of these events, and I am going to put in a public plug here. I'm a recent graduate of the Arizona State University Thunderbird School Global Management Space Leadership course. Why is that important? Well, I'm going to communicate this to you. I'm not trying to impress, but to impress the point. I already had 9 master's degrees. I didn't necessarily need to get another master's degree. But what I found is that Thunderbird was looking at creating the next generation of space leaders to be able to communicate and educate others about these things we're talking about. And the space leadership course is not just filled with engineers. I mean, we had people who were entrepreneurs. We had people who were in federal government, military government. We had commercial, you name it. We had people who were authors in the course. And all these people came together to help talk about and understand this thing called space. And then what are the different things that we should be doing to understand it in a way where we can communicate it to different groups of people. And also, as Rose said, to identify opportunities that we can create that are going to create revenue or solve problems for Earth-based issues. And so one of the things that the nations in Africa should consider is what does the next generation of space leadership look like to you? And as you look at your schools from K all the way up through university, what are you doing to grow those type of people? They don't necessarily have to be engineers. They can be these other areas. And as Rose pointed out, identifying what those areas are is important. So I would offer, if you haven't looked into something like the T-Bird School Global Management Program, you should, and then consider how do you want to create, either join that or create something like that within your nations. That's an excellent start to address these issues.
Thank you very much. Next question, please. Next question. Okay, so we have a 10-year-old in the room, and on the 20th we are going to be engaging with some students on International Moon Day. For both Carlton and Rose, what would be your message to this age group of students? Not K through 12.
You first, Rose. You first.
Oh, that the future is in your hands. You will be the generation that sees all of these dreams realized, you know, over the coming decades. I am so thrilled to have you here today, and I hope that you can imagine yourself in any number of roles that are involved in space and are contributing to a better world ecosystem, from climate to a fair, you know, and functional economy to, you know, just general health and safety. You know, space is a tool, and you being here today means you're learning how to use that tool. So I'm very happy to have you here.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I would say, and this is just a sports analogy that my dad taught me, and I guess his dad taught him as well. Whether you're playing American football or international soccer, if you can touch it, you can catch it. If you can catch it, you can get that goal. And a lot of times people don't think that, you know, they can do that. I hearken back to Miss Nichelle Nichols, who was the, for those of you who watch the show Star Trek, she was the first African American woman to go onto a show that showed African American people as leaders in a top starship in the Federation fleet, and she was a top officer. One of the things about her is that she spoke at least 100 different dialects of languages. That's why she was a professional in Starfleet. And this is back in the 60s and 70s when this show came out. I remember seeing that. And because of her, it's one of the reasons I joined the Air Force. And as the chairman of the board of governors, she actually happened to be on my board of governors. So that was really cool too. But it started with understanding that what I was seeing, you could do that. You could make that happen. So if you can see it and you can touch it, if you can dream it, you can do it. And just figure out what you want and then go get it. And we want to help, by the way. Before we go, I want to say this. We want to help you guys with this. You have somebody here. When you look at this wonderful person, Rose Crozier, I know I pronounced that right. You have people out there who are professional who want to help you guys do this. And so reach out and communicate and talk with people like Rose and understand that if you don't reach out and have that conversation, that's on you because they're right there to help you. So take this opportunity to reach out to as many people as you can, to include the people in the room, and make those connections to make it better for everybody and leave it better than you found it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have
I just froze. I don't know if you guys can hear us, but you're frozen. If you don't come unfroze, I'm going to start singing Let It Go.
I can hear you. Please no.
Is the moderator still on? I think we just got dropped. Yeah,
Yep,
there you go.
Hi.
I mean, are we in
Yeah,
or
I'm
out?
still on. I'm trying to reach out to them.
Okay. It looks like they're about to come up on the break too. Rose, I don't know if it's the same where you are, but I started my day at 4 a.m. Yeah,